Now I know you think this is a joke video by all means, but it's actually not, because in the midst of covering a grand variety of villains and finding more for my Perfect Villain series of videos, I stumbled upon a grand conclusion that just made much more sense to me. One that involved one of my most favorite villains of all time, coming from the best that Pixar's ever produced in Ratatouille, where it is indeed Chef Skinner in that case being the funniest and greatest of the bunch that I've ever seen, both in terms of saying it jokingly and full-heartedly believing it to be true. Because when you look at the story Ratatouille and the message of anyone can cook, Skinner really does serve his purpose really well as the overall main villain, while having Ego serve the other half of ideas as an anti-villain or secondary to overarching antagonist of the film. Like, it's all introduced secretly, where Ego is the reason for heartbreak towards Remy and his own hero Gusteau, and Chef Skinner is just basically Gusteau's trusted sous chef who took over the restaurant after he died. Nothing too villainous by what you would expect a regular character in the kitchen, but more in line with how Pixar usually portrays them as such, being those coming from normal backgrounds that made sense instead of what the sense that Disney does, usually instilling their villains with evil from the very beginning. But in this case, Skinner is the man who seems very typical for a head chef or owner of a restaurant, upstilling a high order after Gusteau's death and the reputation that had failed ever since, accepting Linguini as a garbage boy to clean around the kitchen with his short temper. So from the very beginning, you can tell he's a bit uptight with how he runs things, being a busy man preoccupied with something else before things start to get more hectic when Remy accidentally enters into the picture. One done because Linguini did ruin the damn soup and now had to fix it himself to create a masterpiece in its place. Where this is the part that reveals Skinner's short temper when he assumes Linguini was cooking by the pot when he stopped Remy, which to be fair, he actually did cook somewhat by throwing crap into the soup that tasted like utter garbage until Remy fixed it, where it sent him to the depths of the short French version of Gordon Ramsay. It is here that we delve into the realm of madness within the realm of paranoia that he would usually begin to display. Still a regular chef on the surface who would like to keep things in order, but actually something along the lines of insanity as things go along, trying to fire Linguini on the spot right there until he was asked to see the critic who tasted the soup and actually enjoyed it. What comes from this is also shocking, where the only logic for him is actually to turn and give in to his fear and paranoia and borderline suspicion of a conspiracy against him, with a new lanky little boy who is harbored as a garbage boy who somehow made a soup that impresses a critic who, amongst like the rest like Ego, had written off Gusteau's. This is great because it goes against the main message of the movie already, trying to write Linguini out of the picture until Colette highlights the motto that the restaurant actually lives by in the words of Gusteau being anyone can cook, where evidently he does relent with that attitude, allowing him to become a chef in the kitchen, but under the condition of him recreating the soup, as he still remains suspicious until Remy actually appears and freaks out with his worst nightmare face to face. One where he wants to kill the rat, but also have Linguini take it outside to do so, as that would be bad for the entire restaurant if a health inspector found out, shutting them down for good alongside their dwindled reputation. But of course, he still is also being shocked by the fact that the critic gave a rave review to the press about a new soup, trying to get to the bottom of this very mystery, greeting Linguini once again with the greatest line ever said in a Pixar or Disney film to date.
Welcome to hell.
And I really love when their films try to do something like this. It fits the dialogue for a villain so well without needing to be full on a curse word, using it in a way that is charming if you get what I mean. The ones that feel like it can translate across generations while feeling like a film you can watch easily as an adult as much as a kid, as Brad Bird was actually good at doing with both in terms of Ratatouille and The Incredibles as mature films that each generation can enjoy, while not actually feeling like it could be stuck for one specific group. But it's all done again to try and test him if he was the one to create the soup or had some outside source of help, as we all know. That he, no matter what happens, is actually destined to throw him off balance in his own kitchen for whatever he has planned specifically, what nefarious deeds he wants to keep his order. Which in fact, we discover is selling Gusteau's name as a frozen microwave dinner brand you typically see at the grocery store. A truly heinous action that disrespects the work of his former friend and boss who valued that message that anyone can cook, but now used in an opposite way that is cheaply made with his face plastered everywhere you went. It's a level of disgusting, depraved morality that you just love because it's just so fun for him to do all of this. Fun for what real cooks are supposed to be like, in the passion that a true artist can have for his craft, unlike the man who currently runs the kitchen. Cause you already know, nothing says Gusteau like frozen microwave burritos, a food item that probably doesn't even exist or is offered under the restaurant because it just doesn't make sense. Where what former 5-star French restaurant would ever serve something like frozen microwave burritos, or burritos in general? But things get worse in his eyes for the fact he reads Renata Linguini's letter that says that her son, the lanky boy who became a chef within a day, is in fact Gusteau's secret son. This is shocking for the reason of what we know about him and what Skinner himself upheld, with an actual heir to the restaurant rather than him and what he runs with the frozen food business. Because as we all know, in Gusteau's will, since he didn't know he had any children, he passed his restaurant on to his sous chef Skinner. It's where we also get to see the cracks of insanity unfold as he pours on his lawyer this trouble that he will get into, where he has to have this task to keep an eye on him with the talent he has at the moment in order to fulfill the truth that has been unveiled. One where we see Remy for a second before the start of the shift to constantly send him into a state of paranoia around Linguini with a rat that pulls the strings, to shift his mind in a way that toys with him that he will lose his restaurant, and angry at the thought that his old customers want food made actually by Linguini now. This is where we see him act deliberately to sabotage the new cook based upon that information we just learned, putting an old and honestly pretty crap recipe to try and test him. You can tell it's very obvious by the fact that the other cooks are worried about the recipe, but how he brushes it off as a worthy challenge for a new budding chef before Remy flips the script because he knows the recipe is in fact crap. And it's kind of painted as bad at first for Linguini to change the recipe since, you know, it's bad to do something like that instead of following the actual ingredients, but from the eyes of Skinner and what we know with the talents of Remy, this change could actually work in his favor to impress, which it actually does when he immediately gets smashed by the door and forced to change his tune to say that this is wonderful news despite what he actually was trying to do, still seeing Remy in secret behind that hat where he longs to get to the bottom of the truth, which actually makes him into a paranoid old freak by the times he tried to pull his hat and nothing comes out of it. All to try and see if rats have helped Linguini in his quest for power that he wants to hold himself when he tries to make him drunk as a skunk. But alas, that also doesn't work where Linguini keeps his cool even throughout when he's actually intoxicated, which to be fair on his part with what we know and his relationship to Remy, is just truly admirable for him to do, to be aware to protect his friend and the secret reputation that Skinner somehow seems vastly interested in. Understandable of course for someone recently placed right there and found out that he is the secret son of Gusteau, who just sees rats everywhere he goes and questions if he's ever been around them for a long time, but regrettably he runs out of all the wine and is left with virtually nothing to work for until his lawyer comes back with the DNA results to confirm that he is indeed Gusteau's son, making him come to the conclusion that this is all a setup, the conspiracy to topple his frozen microwave burrito empire come true in some way. And speaking more about that, you actually have to notice the fact that Skinner never actually cooks at all in the film. Yes, we know he was Gusteau's sous chef where he must have actually learned to cook from before in order to get there, but with what we've been seeing in the course of events of the story, he just never cooks at all and deals mostly with papers and his lucrative frozen food business. This is actually genius on the movie's part because it further cements his character as a villain against Remy and for those who actually want to cook and believe in Gusteau's message, and how that actually made Skinner go completely insane and go the opposite direction to be more greedy to make his own money, talking about rats controlling things and other nonsense that makes his own lawyer worried about his own mental health.
It's here! No, it isn't, it's here! Am I seeing things? Am I crazy? Is there a phantom rat or is there not? But oh no, I refuse to be sucked into his little game of...
Should I be concerned about this? About you?
But this concern actually doesn't help either because he also did find rodent hair within the sample, which sort of proves his point in his own mind that was broken to make things worse for him, that there was a rat controlling things and manipulating pulling the strings, both figuratively and actually physically, where he has to contend with the fact that everything he holds dear is now seriously threatened because good food has returned to the kitchen compared to him selling millions of burritos on a lovable and marketable face to your plate at home.
Gusteau's already has a face and it's fat and lovable and familiar. And it sells burritos! Millions and millions of burritos!
And the train just doesn't stop there when Remy finds out himself about Gusteau's son, where Skinner spots him and they go on this wild nonsensical chase where he just pushes his own cook off of his own bike just to try and catch up for a damn rat that carries his will. Like, this is where you start to dive into the depths of his sadistic insanity for chasing a rat who has the key to his entire restaurant, doing the most outrageous actions in the city of love. Like, you can't imagine a weirder situation than the 3-foot chef who manages to drive a car with his little feet, chase a rat off a moped and into the Seine, because that just doesn't make sense. And I just love Ratatouille for doing it and finally ousting Skinner when he gets the letter received back at the restaurant, finally toppling his frozen microwave empire once and for all, burning it to the stake while the greatest days of the kitchens are in a comeback. where the only thing he can do right now is sit back and watch as a customer, claiming that this is still his restaurant he wants to desperately cling to the health inspector to try and save it for him, which might not happen as his earliest convenience would have been 3 months away. This is where he actually disappears for the most part in the film, until tensions grow high for both Remy and Linguini, where he sets up a trap for him knowing that Remy is the real cook, in which he promises not to kill him as long as he actually makes him a new line of frozen food. The most evilest plan you've ever known or seen on the planet, or just the most craziest that just seems too funny to actually see. All the while trying to act as a customer in the restaurant to see Linguini fail against his ultimate test of ego after learning of Gusteau's comeback to be popular. And he thinks that this would work when ratatouille gets served to him, but then actually notices that Ego likes the dish and dives in himself, actually savoring it. This is where the final defeat comes, where his worst nightmare comes true, entering to find out which one of his cooks actually made it since he knew Linguini had help from a rat, and discovering the fact that the entire kitchen was instead infested with such rats. Finally locking him up with the health inspector being the final defeat of him in the entire film. The last time we also get to see him. I mean, of course they had to set him free and the restaurant gets shut down, but the story didn't need him to continue after this. The victory they wanted for the hero already happened and better things actually came from it, where he didn't actually need to return it all and left the future up to them rather than butcher the legacy of what was with frozen microwave goods. Skinner just remained to be an excellent villain that combined the levels of comedy and messaging into one that fit the story of where they needed to go. One that makes total sense in the world that can blend in without feeling like he's an overall threat in the sense that other villains would present themselves, the typical image of pure evil. That without question, regardless of my actual feelings about how other characters are shown, Skinner just remains to be one of the greatest animated villains of all time in my opinion. Or if you're still on the fence about it, you are just damn wrong. But hopefully you get what I mean when I describe him as such. Just a lovable, fun aspect for the flavor he brings for the film, and I appreciate the late Ian Holm who played Bilbo Baggins for bringing that voice to life and what we deserve. So with all of that said, Ratatouille still is a comedic masterpiece, and I'm all done. So goodbye.